A bleak picture in the August jobs report. The country adding just 96,000 jobs in August, falling well short of expectations, but the disappointing numbers could be blunted politically, at least in headlines, as the unemployment rate did fall 0.2% to 8.1. The new numbers come just hours after President Obama makes his case for 4 more years, again framing the fight as a choice election and urging undecided voters to stick with him to finish the job of rebuilding the economy. And while the president mostly played good cop, Vice President Biden brought the tough stuff for Mitt Romney. And one of the most bruising bashings of Romney came from none other than John Kerry. Good morning from Charlotte. It's Friday, September 7th, 2012. This is the Daily Rundown. I'm Chuck Todd. We're about to pack up here on the last show before we all disappear from Charlotte. But the jobs report, of course, just came out a few minutes ago. We're going to have Mark Zandi, our man, every month on the jobs report here. And later in the show, we'll get the first reaction from the White House with, of course, the president's top economic advisor, Alan Krueger. That's all ahead. We got Beau Biden here, the son of the vice president. He'll talk about that speech. But let's get right to my first reads of the morning, and let's talk about last night's speech. The president aides acknowledged last night's acceptance speech wasn't the president's most poetic or memorable, but even though the speech was more methodical than lyrical, it was intended to accomplish many of the political goals the president set out. Facing the political fight of his life, the president made the case for his re-election, asking Americans to stick with him for another 4 years, despite these tough economic times.
Our problems can be solved. Our challenges can be met. The path we offer may be harder, but it leads to a better place, and I'm asking you to choose that future.
4 years after hope and change, the president felt he had to appeal to the cynical middle, independents, disillusioned Democrats who, frankly, are exhausted by the tone of American politics.
I know campaigns can seem small, even silly sometimes. Trivial things become big distractions. I mean, if you're sick of hearing me approve this message, believe me, so am I.
The president also worked to disqualify Romney as an alternative. And though he rarely mentioned Romney by name, he made him a punchline, it seemed, at every opportunity. His references always were to, quote, his opponent. And they were dismissive, but also oblique enough to make sure he didn't sound too negative.
My opponent and his running mate are new to foreign policy. You might not be ready for diplomacy with Beijing if you can't visit the Olympics without insulting our closest ally. If you can't afford to start a business or go to college, take my opponent's advice and borrow money from your parents.
Speech lacked the soaring rhetoric of his 2 more famous convention speeches of 2004 and 2008. 2008, the president used the word promise 32 times in his acceptance speech. He used that word just 7 times last night. Instead, the president used his workmanlike speech to frame the contest as a choice. Those words, choice or choose, they were used more than 20 times.
Now you have a choice. So now you have a choice. And now you have a choice. Now we have a choice. This is the choice we now face. The choice you face won't just be between 2 candidates or 2 parties. It will be a choice between 2 different paths for America. A choice between 2 fundamentally different visions for the future.
During much of the speech, it felt like the president was working, ticking through things he knew he had to accomplish. It wasn't until the end of the speech that you could see the president started to truly enjoy himself. The president talked to his base. He was trying to redefine hope and change, re-energize those young and Hispanic voters that he has to have in order to win.
The election 4 years ago wasn't about me. It was about you. My fellow citizens, you were the change. You're the reason a young immigrant who grew up here and went to school here and pledged allegiance to our flag will no longer be deported from the only country she's ever called home. Why selfless soldiers won't be kicked out of the military because of who they are or who they love.
You know, it's interesting watching the evaluation of the president's speech. He's being compared to himself, a little bit to Clinton, but the fact of the matter is you got to compare the president versus Romney. Romney got graded on a curve for himself. It was, as many of his own supporters said, good. He gave a good speech for Romney. And so when you compare the president sitting there with Mitt Romney, and that's a case where the Obama campaign feels pretty good about where it stands when you put those two speeches side by side. One thing that was very striking about last night's program, the amount of time the Democrats spent playing the commander-in-chief card, not just talking about Osama bin Laden, we knew that was going to happen, but making the broader case for the president's foreign policy achievements. We expected Vice President Biden to play character witness and tough cop, and he did, almost rubbing Romney's nose, though, in bin Laden's success. That was a little surprising.
When he was asked about bin Laden in 2007, here's what he said. He said, it's not worth moving heaven and earth and spending billions of dollars just to catch one person. If you understood that America's heart had to be healed, you would have done exactly what the president did, and you would move heaven and earth to hunt him down and to bring him to justice.
Biden spent his 38-minute address testifying to the president's decisive, gutsy leadership. It was very clear after last night why the Obama campaign wanted Biden rather than former President Clinton as the president's warm-up act. We also heard a lot of Democrats talk about Afghanistan. Massachusetts Senator John Kerry made fun of how hard Romney's Afghanistan policy is to pin down.
It isn't fair to say that Mitt Romney doesn't have a position on Afghanistan. He has every position. Talk about being for it before you were against it. Mr. Romney, here's a little advice. Before you debate Barack Obama on foreign policy, you better finish the debate with yourself.
Did you ever think John Kerry would use that line in his own speech? Anyway, here's the question. If Romney had not provided an opening by omitting Afghanistan from his acceptance speech, would we have seen such a heavy emphasis by Democrats on the war, patriotism, and veterans issues? There were moments last night when we looked around and wondered which party is staging this event. Notably, Romney did hold an event with veterans yesterday in New Hampshire. But, folks, it paled in comparison with what the Obama campaign put on last night. So, with 60 days until Election Day to go, what's the state of the race? Mitt Romney entered this summer slightly behind and had a few big opportunities to change that. So far, he's not been able to do that. The summer was a battle to define Romney, and it's clear the president won that fight. Romney had to spend his convention fixing his biography. We'll see if the president ticks up a point or two after this convention. But at best, for Romney, the conventions have been a wash. At worst, President basically got by another moment. The president hasn't broken open this race, but you saw the building up of the president as a man by Michelle. You had the contrast in the economic narrative from Bill Clinton, and you had the presentation on the way forward from the president. Another way to look at it, Michelle put down the building blocks, Clinton put up the walls, and Obama put on the roof. But beyond a concerted effort to make Romney more likable, you didn't see the same thing last night in Tampa. For Romney, that's another missed opportunity. And Romney is running out of opportunities. The campaign is rolling out a big ad buy this morning. 15 new ads will run in 8 battleground states. But take a look at where Romney is not running ads. He's not buying time in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Michigan. He's not expanded the map. The pressure on Romney leading up to that first presidential debate has only grown after the last 2 weeks. Today's disappointing jobs report will be the backdrop as the president and Mitt Romney both stump in Iowa and New Hampshire today. They will miss each other. I think they will be flying next to each other, going east and west. And those bad unemployment reports, of course, have been a constant. But Romney continues to rely on outside events. Is that enough to change the status quo?